Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host today, and today's episode is the May News and AMA. Ask me anything about chocolate or cocoa. Before we begin today's episode, what I want to do is remind everybody that this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of The Chocolate Life. Here's the homepage of The Chocolate Life right now. And you can click, all of these links are live. I can explore, I can find out what's going on in the Chocolate Life. If you are a member, you will be able to see the member newsletter. I'm logged in, I'm a member, so I can see the member newsletter. And of course, members can comment, ask questions on any post on the Chocolate Life. So please do join us there and show your support. Also, as you can see in the ticker that's scrolling below me, like, subscribe, share, comment on this post, join the Chocolate Life community on YouTube. And if you're watching, no matter where in the world you might be watching, you can go into the live chat on YouTube. You can go into the comments on LinkedIn and Facebook, and let me know where in the world you are connected to. Let me know where in the world you're connecting from, and I will get that up on screen, get that shout out up on screen. For every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I produce a post, and here is the post. Whoops, let me go to the top. The post of today's episode, I was scrolling through to make sure things work properly. Here's for the post of today's episode. It shows a run-through, a run of show, so it'll talk about the topics in the order, and it'll provide the links, so you don't have to pay attention to what the URLs are or the links are doing. You can follow along, or what you can do is afterwards, you can go and you can visit all of the resources, all of the online resources that I mentioned. If I put up a file, you can download the file. All of those things are available from this post on the Chocolate Life. And you don't have to be a member to be able to take advantage of these things. Although, of course, I appreciate the membership. And I want to start out today, as I start out all of the news and AMA episodes for the last year or more, is to talk about the price of cocoa. So, and I'm going to start off a little bit differently than I have in the past. What I want to do is I want to show you this post, which is from Business Recorder. This link is not in the post yet. I will add it after the fact. But you can see that this is the date of April 2024, and it says cocoa futures fall nearly 10%. Right now, that's a little bit different. That's a little, there's similar reporting from around the same time on Bloomberg. Unfortunately, I don't have a Bloomberg membership, so I can't get to this page. But the headline is cocoa prices swing wildly as liquidity overshadows supply issues. This is also from about a year ago. So they're talking about just huge volatility in the markets. And then around the same time, this is in Confectionery Production Magazine, hope for the global cocoa industry sector at a pivotal crossroads in history. So what does that mean, and what's going on, right? And what is, I think, a better ground truth on the situation. So I want to take a look at where cocoa is today, right? And so what we do is we find that today's price, right, at the last time this was refreshed, was 10,913 US dollars per metric ton. So we're down from the high of roughly from close to 12,000. What is it? Close to 12,000 in December, 11,800 plus in December. Maybe it clicked over 12,000, and we're down to 10,000. But we've been as low as in the high 700, 7,700 thereabouts. And if we look a little more closely at this, what we'll do is we'll see there's a fair amount of volatility that's been going on in the last year. There was a huge downward price trend, which had to do with people's hopes for how much cocoa was going to be produced in the main harvest this year, and what how much cocoa is going to be produced in the off harvest. So this is one place where you can go and you can take a look at this. And I like this among other things because what I can do is I can go back and look at the 50-year. Actually, I'm not signed in, so I'm going to go look at the 10-year trend, and this is pretty insane. The price was fairly standard within a fairly narrow range between $2,000 and $4,000 a metric ton for the last 10 years, but we've seen just huge volatility. And the question is, why? Right? I think the best way to respond to the answer of why is that we have aging trees in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, especially. They produce the majority of the world's cocoa. We have lots of contraindicators in labor. So aging farmers, there is a fair amount of illegal labor that's going on, whether you want to call it slavery, whatever you want to call it, there's a fair amount of illegal labor going on. And coupled with low prices that farmers have been getting. And so what this means is that there has been no systemic investment in either farms or farming in the major cocoa producing countries in West Africa for the last 50 years. Right? This is investment that the governments should have been taking care of because they're earning a lot of revenue from export taxes and other things, which are other duties and tariffs and activities which are associated with cocoa, right? And also the companies who have been buying the cocoa, whether it is a cocoa trader or big chocolate. None of these companies have seen fit to think about the long-term availability or the viability of their supply chains. And what has happened over the course, perhaps of the last 20 years or so, is that what is called civil society, which is non-governmental organizations and individuals, companies, have stepped in to see what it is that they can do. But they certainly don't have the resources that the government of Ghana has, the government of Cote d'Ivoire has. They don't have the resources that these big cocoa trading companies have. And the responsibility, for some reason, has been pushed off on other people. The farmers are bearing the brunt of this. All right. And for some reason, it is up to non-governmental organizations to solve this problem. But even when we go take a look at these prices, it peaked above 12,000 up here. None of the money that was represented by this massive increase in prices has gone towards addressing the problem. Old farmers, old farms, infirm trees, which are low production, right, are less resilient to the effects of climate change. So when there are weather events that get together that have either too much water or not enough water, too much water obviously increases humidity, which increases things like fungal diseases, which reduces production. So none of the money which has been associated with this rise in prices has gone into actually addressing the root cause of the problem, which is aging trees, aging farmers, and things like that. And so the real question is why this drop? Why were people thinking that if there's no investment in actually solving the problem, why was there any interest? Why was there any market demand, right, for driving prices down? And it turns out it was just hope, nothing more than hope. And when the reality of what was happening in the main crop and what's going to be happening on the mid crop, what we're seeing the prices go back up again. And so from 7,800 over 10,000, so we're seeing what's another 25, 30% increase. And this is in the last 2 months. This is where the pricing has gone. So the bad news is for small chocolate makers especially is that what you would hope for was some long-term trends towards the price going down. I would be very careful in terms of what my expectations are, right? Because I don't think it's going to happen. And the price is going down and stabilizing at under $8,000 a metric ton is not likely to happen unless tens of millions of dollars, if not hundreds of millions of dollars or more, are invested in solving the problem of aging farms, aging trees, and aging farmers in the major producing countries in the world. And this is not just the major producing countries in the world. This is worldwide. Every producing country needs to have this sort of long-term systemic commitment to investment in the farms and farmers. Right. But having said that, there's no way here on trading economics to go and download these statistics. But if you go to ICCO, I'll put the link to this page. Right. What you can do is you can say here are the closing prices on both London, New York, and the ICCO daily price in US and euros per ton. Right. So you've got 4 different prices. Unfortunately, there's no indication of what the exchange rates are, so we don't know what these are to each other. But I suppose you could download a table of exchange rates and figure out, because these are closing prices probably. So you can figure out what the central bank exchange rate is with the close of day, and you can figure out what this is. I mean, the big companies will do this because they'll decide to pay their bills in whatever is the best currency, the most favorable currency for the transaction. But you can look at 100 entries, you can download everything. And then if you want to, there's this little button down here in the bottom where it says show all. I believe, is it at the bottom or the top? Oh yeah, you can say show all entries. I'm not going to do it because this can take forever to reload the page. But you can download all of these statistics, put them into Excel, put them into a database, and start running some sophisticated algorithms. They also analysis algorithms. They also do the monthly average, which is useful in terms of visualization. So you can download those as well. So the ICCO stats are interesting. What I would also do, and I'll put a link to it, is I'll put together the FAO with the UN Federal Agricultural Organization. The UN FAO has similar stats, but more detailed. And it would be interesting to do that analysis. So I haven't done it. It actually requires a fair amount of work, and I'm not a statistician. But you do have access to raw data if you're interested in taking a look at it. Well, let's go look at the markets right now. So we're looking at the cash price for cocoa. Let me zoom this up a little bit. I'm not going to be able to do a great job of showing you closely. I mean, you need to have a big screen. But these prices will show you the current price that's being paid. Yesterday's close, actually, the 19th, was $10,906, which was the high for the day. And it's actually down from the previous day, which is 10,927. So here what you do is you have a list of historical prices, and you can see what things have looked like, and you can see the changes over the course of the day. So this is just really, really quickly, you can see, here's what today's price is, and here's what it was a couple of months ago. And so we see that on the 2nd or the 18th of February, it was 10,300 a ton. It went down to $7,800 a ton, and it's been bouncing around. And then recently, it's just been this stratospheric increase. And the reason why, as it says here on the Trading Economics, you can take a look at it. Cocoa futures climbed a level not seen due to speculative buying and lingering supply fears. Concerns remain over the mid-crop and upcoming mid-crop in Ivory Coast as dry weather continues to pose a risk to crop development. Right? And so Big Cocoa is concerned about the supply coming out of West Africa. And while they were a little more sanguine about there being larger harvests, it turns out that hope has not come to pass. And they're now faced with the reality that the supply is tightening again. And so they're paying more. So there are a bunch of other places we could go with this. I don't want to spend too much more time on it, but what I do recommend is that if you are a chocolate maker, just put a task in your calendar, and once a week, go take a look at some of these prices, right? And read what it is that the professionals who are following these commodities are telling you about what's likely to be having an impact on the prices. I think it's very, very important that you do this, a few minutes on Monday before the start of business, a few minutes on Friday after the end of business, I would like to bracket my week doing both of those things, but you'll get a sense for market movement and what you may need to do in terms of um, perhaps placing orders or doing other things that you can do to secure your supply of beans and derivatives, because the price of cocoa beans obviously affects the price of butter and powder. So these are a reason to do that. So the next thing I wanted to talk about here is a related topic. And this is the ongoing controversy over something called the living income reference price. And so the living income reference price is an idea that civil society has had that says that we should set a minimum annual income, which we're going to call the living income, which represents what a farmer and their farm needs to live um, over the course of a year. So this is annual income. So I'm not going to go to that actually in too much depth, but what I wanted to do is, what is the living income reference price? There's a definition for what the living income reference price is. It indicates the farm gate price needed for a typical farmer household with a viable crop area and a sustainable productivity level to earn a living income from the sale of the crop. So it says that if I'm a cocoa farmer, right, I have enough land, right, and there is a sufficient level of productivity given the land that I have, so that if I sell my product, if I sell my cocoa, I can earn above the living income reference price. And so a group of people get together and they do some they do some math, and they say this is what the farmers should achieve as a farm gate. This is what the farmers should look for as a farm gate price, right? So, um, so the four elements of the living income reference price are sustainable yields, viable crop area, cost of sustainable production, and the living income. And what has going on here is that I've underlined some of the key components here, but also given a link to something called the Anchor methodology at the Global Living Wage Coalition, which actually goes and talks about what the methodology is for defining a living wage. And for me, this notion of living income reference price is a lot like the question about who decides what's fair. While there may be some farmers that are involved in the discussion about what the living income reference price is, it's really a bunch of right people in the global north telling people in the global south what's fair, right? So it's, if the reverse were true, if I had farmers, right, who were to go to the executives at Fair Trade and say, here's what we think is fair, right? Here's what we think is a living wage, and we should cap your salary at the living wage. Then the reciprocity might be interesting. But none of the people who are executives, right, in civil societies, right, are in fact being paid at the level which is above the poverty line in the countries that they're domiciled in. So it's again, it's, I think the whole notion of, people in the global north, which is a racist term, global north, and people in the global south. Global south is a racist term, but it's people in the global north telling people in the global south what's fair and what can be expected as a living income, right? Without any reciprocity, without any ironic self-awareness even, right? There is, but you can go and take a look at it. You can look at the methodology, and this is what they're looking to do, right? So you can learn more about that. But what's interesting is that there is a discrepancy in major cocoa producing countries. So particularly in Ghana, the government sets the farm gate price, and it's done on an irregular basis. And what has happened is that as the price of cocoa has shot up to, now above $10,000 a ton, it's been at 12, right, from this historic 2,000 or so a metric ton. What has happened is that the farm gate price in Ghana has remained very low. right? So even though it's at $10,000 a ton in the market, the farm gate price in Ghana is still under $3,000 a metric ton. So none of the difference between the farm gate price and the exchange price is being returned to the farmers in Ghana. That's similar, true, slight differences in Cote d'Ivoire and other countries for which there is a controlled economy. But Nigeria is an open commodity, and the farm gate price is whatever the farmers can get for it. The same thing is true of most Latin American countries, is the farmers are getting whatever the farmers can get for the price. Uh, for, so in a place. So for example, a quick shout out to Tony Myers, whom I met when he was the editor at Confectionery News, for the work he's doing on his new site, Cocoa Radar. Um, so there is a lot of pushback against the fair trade living income reference price, right? For precisely this reason, right? Fair trade is fair, we think, right? But the fair trade living income reference prices is getting a lot of pushback, right? And this is from February during CHOCOA, right? And one of the things that came out of that, that's in that article, the link is here, you can go and read it, dated February 5th, is that fair trade's new reference prices, calculated in local currency, are converted to 268 per kilo of cocoa from Ghana, a 26% increase, which is a lot, right? But that doesn't say much, which it was low, right? And 265 a kilo from the Ivory Coast, right? As fair trade does with its minimum price, the Ivorian reference price is set in euros instead of US dollars, right? But here's the reference farm gate price is in Ghana is 268 per kilo, right? Which may or may not be a part of the calculation of the Ghanaian government farm gate price, but it's still at this point, less than a third of what the market price is. And what people are saying is that why aren't farmers in countries with controlled economies getting a larger share of this? How come the farm gate price is set where it is? And so we find, again, this is in recently, this is in early May, right? So you can go find out what the LIRP is. So here's a way to go figure it out. There's a response from the head of fair trade about pushback and what the fair trade's policy is. This is a more recent one. There are now calls for the living income reference prices to be suspended because of the use of questionable data. So some of the questions around data are actually, what they do is they reference this one here, questions, the article questions figures released in Tony's open chain impact report from 2022, 2023, 2024, right? Published before the publication of the reference standard, right? Says that the expected yield is set at 800 kilos a hectare, right? Whereas the actual average yields are 580 kilos a hectare, with aspirational yields at 620 kilos a hectare. So what this does is it says the LIRP, the LIRP, right, estimates an average production of 800 kilos per hectare to meet the living income reference price, whereas the actual known average yields are are less than 600 kilos a hectare, which is what, 3/4, only 75%, it's less than 75% of what the LIRP is based on. And so there is this huge gap in the methodology, which is used to determine the fair trade living income reference price, which calls into question, what the heck is it for, right? If the market price is so high, right, what's happening to the difference between $2,800 a metric ton and $9,000 a metric ton? Who's making the money there? Is it the government? Is it the traders? Where is that money going? The one thing we know for sure is that because of ideas like what the fair trade minimum is, because with the farm gate price, which is set by the government, because of the living income reference price, right, which is set, is we know the farmers aren't getting it, right? And we know that because the farmers aren't getting it, we can also guess that there is no plan by Big Chocolate, there's no plan by Big Cocoa, there's no plan by the governments to actually take the tens of millions, if not hundreds of millions of dollars that's going to be necessary to go and increase the productivity and the resilience of these farms. And we don't want productivity for productivity's sake, right? I think the goal, and this is a goal that I've been promoting to a bunch of different places, is what we want to get to a point where we can produce more cocoa or the same amount of cocoa on less land. If we can produce the same amount of cocoa on less land, then what we can do is we can take the land that we're not planting in cocoa and do things like convert it to planting, which will increase other cash crops, other crops that the farmer can use to feed their household, to promote biodiversity by putting together corridors where animals and birds can traverse from one part of the country to another part of the country. So rather than just thinking about increasing productivity for the sake of increasing productivity, can we find a way to think about increasing productivity by saying, can we get to the level of production we need on less land? Can we reduce the pressure to deforest? Can we use the land that we're no longer planting in cocoa to plant other things, right? It could be agroforestry, and it could just be restorative, right? Let's go replace what was there before it was cut down. Well, you can never replace, right? The whole notion of, a second growth forest as opposed to a first growth forest, it will take a long time for the kind of diversity to be able to be regained. But I think the focus has got to be on this long-term systemic investment to increase productivity with respect to the amount of land that is involved in producing the cocoa. And if we can do that, I think we can secure the future for cocoa farmers and cocoa farming. But without that systemic investment and the acknowledgement that this is what needs to get done, what we're going to find is that we're always going to be in this cycle where we're hoping that we won't run into a bad weather event this harvest. So we're hoping that there will be enough rain, but not too much rain. We're hoping the humidity will down, and so we're not getting lots of fungal diseases, which are killing pods on the trees, right? As long as we're just, hope and a prayer, putting our finger in the wind, hoping the breeze is blowing in the right direction, we're never going to move out of this era of uncertainty. It was entirely predictable that this would happen, right? But what is not, and it is actually probably entirely predictable, that industry is abdicating its responsibility. They're not taking a look at actually what is needed in order to be able to solve the problem. They're trying to figure out other things to do. And they're trying to push off responsibility to civil society, right? The governments need to take care of this. Big Chocolate and Big Cocoa need to take care of this, right? Because they're the ones who are responsible for us being in the situation that we're being. But it's this comment here, questions regarding Tony's Open Chain Impact Report, the 2023-2024 report. Now, the reason why I want to bring that up is what's the connection between the LIRP report and the Tony's 2023 FAIR report? And what you'll do is you'll find it in this episode, which is episode 114. It was primarily about the chocolate scorecard, but in that episode, I did take a look at this page 6 of the 2023-2024 Tony's Impact Report. So this is the connection. And what I did, let's go back to this page. What I did is said, here's the page 6. Here's this page. And I want to go take a look at this block over it here. And it says, if you can't read it, the total amount of premium paid per metric ton. This is the total premium paid per metric ton. So 2,200 in the Ivory Coast and 2,000 in Ghana. So if Tony's was paying $4,000 a metric ton for cocoa on average during this period, they would have paid $6,000 or euro. Actually, we got to do this in euros. So if they're paying 4,000 euros a metric ton, they were paying 6,000 euros a metric ton. And what I did is I took a look at their balance sheet, and I said, there's no way if they purchase 18,000 metric tons times 6,000 is 100 million. There's no, more or less, there's no way that they paid $100 million for cocoa. And so what I did was I posted on LinkedIn. Let's go and find that LinkedIn post. Here's the LinkedIn post. So I post on LinkedIn. I don't have a date. It was 3 weeks ago. And I said on page 6 of the report, right? So 34 million in premiums on 100 million in cocoa. Where is it in the P&L, right? And this is, there are over 108,000 views of this post, 30 comments, not a whole lot of reposts, but 100,000 views. So it's the most viewed single post of mine ever on LinkedIn. And while it's not immediately obvious, you have to scroll down through the comments. But at one point, the people at Tony's said, hey, guess what? We made a mistake, right? This is a copy editing mistake. And what we should have done is publish something else. And the question is, what else should they have published? So this is what's on page 6, the total amount of premium paid, right? So 2,000 times 17,000 metric tons, it's like 34 million, right? Right. But what we do is let's go look at another page. And this is page 136 of the same report. And what it says is the price paid to enable a living income, right? So 2,200 and 2005. These are the numbers, right, which are here. These are the numbers which are here. So the price paid to enable a living income is very, very different from premiums paid. So what this says is they paid at least this much per ton. Now, they're paying this much per ton even when, because the farm gate price in Ghana is limited. They're paying something which is around the farm gate price of cocoa in Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana as set by the government, right? But what they did after I pointed this out, they said, oh, right, there is a comment. I don't want to go find the comment. I'll put the link in the post. If you want to go find the comment, you have to go from the most relevant to all in order to be able to see it. They said, we made a mistake, right? It was a quote unquote copy editing error. And I made the point at the time in another post that if they do update the post, right, if they do update the annual report, they're not going to indicate that this is in fact an update. So this report that you're seeing right here was published in February before the updated fair trade LIRP price was announced, right? So this was done in February before that price. And so it has been out for 3 months. So February, March, April, more than 3 months. Before anybody caught the mistake, apparently I'm the first person to catch this mistake and to call them out on it publicly, which, says a lot about something. I don't get notifications of when Tony's annual reports are published. Right? But what they did, as I prophesied they would, is that they made the change. They made a change. Here it is, right? And so instead of it saying, here's the total amount of premium paid, it said, right, here's the amount of here's the living income reference price paid. And that whole locution, the whole structure, the amount of living income reference price paid, the amount of. So this is not the amount of, this is the amount paid based on the LIRP, because it was the amount of, it would be a percentage. We paid 110% of the LIRP. We paid 90% of the LIRP. We paid, what did we pay? So that's not the amount of, right? This is the amount they paid. But notice there's no indication anywhere on this page that this is updated from the first version. So that if you just came to this the first time today, right, you would not notice that this was a change, right, from this. So for Tony's, transparency much? You're not willing to admit to the fact that you made a mistake? Did you communicate this mistake to all of your special friends, right, who are the people who like your chocolate, who are looking to you to be a paragon of transparency and accurate reporting? The answer is no. I'm guessing, right? But if there's anybody from Tony's who'd like to go and talk about this in the post here, comment on it, send me. You can, you know, my, there is an email address in my profile on LinkedIn. You can DM me, all right, on this. If you want to let me know what's going on, have you done any of this? My guess is the answer is no. Nobody has done it, right? And so why are we holding them in such high esteem for their transparency? I don't think we should be. Right? Now, that's not to say, as much as I have these things to say about Tony's, what we do have to recognize is that they are brilliant marketers. Right? There is no way to overlook the fact, right, that what Tony's has done is they've said, here is a topic, and we're thinking about, originally it was, we're going to eliminate slavery, then it was about illegal labor, and I think they've now softened it to reducing exploitation, right? So, we do need to take a look at the language that has been used to describe the mission, how it has changed as they realize the enormity of the task that they face. So, irrespective of all those things, they have been a brilliant single issue marketing company. There are incredibly enthusiastic supporters of the company around the world. Obviously in the Netherlands, which is where the company is headquartered, right? But also in the UK and Ireland, which there's a huge contingent of people who are very, very loyal to the brand because they think that when they buy a bar of chocolate, what they're doing is they're actually ending the exploitation of children, especially in the cocoa supply chain in at least two countries, Cote d'Ivoire and Ghana, which are apparently the only two countries where Tony's sources from, right? They're hesitant. They don't talk about the relationship with Barry Callebaut, which is the only reason they can sell the chocolate that they do sell at the price they sell it for, right? Is because of the relationship with Barry Callebaut. And if you go to the chocolate scorecard, what you'll do is you'll find that Tony's is very highly rated, but Barry Callebaut is not as highly rated, which is one of the reasons why I don't think that Tony's wants to talk about, right, that relationship, because it would remove some of the burnish, right? Some of the luster of the brand image when it's shown that they have not been able to convince their production partner to up their game to the same level that they have. So I'm not a huge fan of Tony's reporting, and because I think it's designed, when you go take a look at it, I think the way the reports are designed, they're designed to obfuscate. This is not easy to parse, right, in looking it through. And then you'll notice is they have trouble parsing it because on another page, again, it's 100 pages away, this is the data that they're using, right? And they can't even get it right in their same document. If it's hard for the editors of this document to do it right, it's hard for outsiders to do it right, because we don't know if any of these statistics is, again, a copy error, right? What we have to do is we have to look to see if there's any internal inconsistency, which leads us to believe that there are more copy errors in this report, which is over 200 pages long in total. So I think Tony's needs to do better, number one. And number two is they also need to acknowledge the fact that they made a change. They haven't made a change, and that's a real problem. But, right, so go take a look at it. Tell me what you think. Am I wrong? Right? Am I wrong to think that, recognizing their success and brilliance at their single issue marketing that they've done? I don't think that anybody can. Well, no, maybe you have a different idea. Let me know if you think it's different. Go into the comments, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. Let me know what it is that you think. Be happy to entertain them, or just let me know where in the world you're watching from, and I'll get the shout out up on screen. But this is the connection between Tony's and the living income reference price. And what I want to do is continue to push Tony's, right, to go and be more open about their reporting, and to let independent auditors go take a look. So they have independent auditors of their financial statements, but I don't necessarily know that they have independent auditors of everything else that they're writing here. I also have some interesting questions about the open chain and the statistics in the open chain. They're using technology, I understand, from a company called Chainpoint. So they didn't develop the technology, but it would be interesting to know, because if we go take a look at this page, here are um, their open chain partners, mission allies, as they call them. So we need to go in and find out if they're truly open and they want to be transparent. If they truly want to be transparent, there's a lot of data in the open chain which should be available to the general public, and I don't think any of it is. And why not? What are they trying to hide? If they're talking about meeting their 5 sourcing principles being fully applied, come on, guys, come on, Tonys, let somebody go take a look at it and interview all of these people and figure out what it is that's going on. I'm available, right? I would love for you guys to be able to let's see, I think the English phrase would be drop trowel, right? And have somebody examine what it is that you're talking about, without fear and without, I am interested in understanding the truth of this, not making a point one way or the other, because I think Tony's, your special friends, right? The people who buy into your mission deserve nothing less than that. Right. Anyway, that's Tony's, that's LIRP, that's the cocoa, the price of cocoa. You need to be careful in the price of cocoa. I don't think it's going down anytime soon, right? It might go down again back to the high 7,000s, but if anybody thinks that it's going to go down to 4,000 or under 6,000 a ton anytime in the next couple of years, I don't think it's happening at all. I just don't see any indicators that the investment is being made at the farm level, right, in order to be able to bring productivity to the level that it needs to be in order to meet the living income reference price goals, which should be considered the bare minimum. It's not like the top of where we should be going. This should be considered like, how do we get the farmer gate price to be double the LIRP, right? What can we do to make that happen, right? And then let's see what happens there. But this is it. All right. So so along the same thing, here is still yet another company that is looking to replace cocoa beans. So cocoa beans, the supply chain is full of, it's like there's uncertainty, and the price is going up, and it's an agricultural commodity, and we're shipping this stuff around the world, so the carbon footprint is just really really crazy. So what they're looking to do is they're looking to de-risk global supply chain by provide companies with alternatives to coffee and coffee beans and cocoa beans. And so they're using some proprietary technology. They've been in the market for a couple of years. They have a company called Minus Coffee. So companies called Compound Foods. Beanless coffee is formulated with upcycled ingredients that include the seeds of date, chicory, sunflower, carob, and grape, right? So they roast upcycled roots, and then we grind and brew them in a gorgeous fermentation batch. So they're using precision fermentation to be able to control the direction of how flavors are developed during the process of fermentation, to create a dry mass which can be ground into the texture of coffee, whether it's a coarse grind or a pour over, or a medium grind for a pour over, coarse grind for a drip, or an espresso grind. But your coffee isn't coffee anymore, right? It is a mixture of a variety of seeds. And they're doing a similar kind of thing. So they're using their cocoa-free cocoa, which is an oxymoron, and I'll talk a little bit about that, is formulated with upcycled ingredients, including carob, which is partly the flavor, mesquite, spent grain, sunflower lesson, and cascara. So cascara is probably the coffee cherry. I mean, so it's the coffee cherry, although cascara in this point could be cocoa husks. Not entirely sure. It doesn't say what the cascara is from. I normally think of that word associated with coffee. So they're using mesquite, spent grain. And this might actually be a really, really interesting use for spent grain. If what they're going to do is they're going to mix it all together and ferment it, because one of the challenges of taking spent grain from brewing and turning it into a flour is that you need to dewater it, right? And so if you don't dewater it, right, that's the most significant energy cost in using spent grain. Is it takes an enormous amount of energy to eliminate the water from spent grain. But if they're taking the spent grain, and they're adding water to it with all these other ingredients, that would be a good way to use spent grade. But cocoa-free cocoa is an oxymoron, right? So, yeah, and I realize, of course, that what I have been doing is I've been sharing my screen. So here's this company, right? Um, and they're talking about this. So cocoa-free cocoa, for me, cocoa-free cocoa is like plant-based meat, right? Plant-based meat is an oxymoron. So if we're taking grains and we're using heme to be able to make it taste and look a lot like it's got blood in it, right? It's a complete and total oxymoron. There is no plant-based meat, right? Is just a horrible name. And so cacao-free cocoa is a horrible meat. It's not. It's a cacao replacement, right? It's a cacao substitute, right? It is not cacao-free cocoa. And it can't be used to make chocolate, right? Because none of those ingredients are actually in the legal definition of what chocolate is, right? So it may make sense for, the little bit of chocolate that's around a candy bar, right? Where it's really not about the chocolate. It's really about what's inside. If you were to replace this chocolate with what's around a Snickers bar, would people really care? And would they really notice? Chances are not. But it's, if you're looking for a solid bar of chocolate, even if it's something, industrial like Lindt Excellence, right? This is not going to work for the majority of the chocolate lovers in the world, right? So it's may fit into existing manufacturing pipelines, relieving the need for reformulation. I don't see how big, so big chocolate companies are investing tens of millions of dollars into these companies. Are they also then going to spend another tens of millions or hundreds of millions into upgrading their plant, right, in order to be able to handle new formulations, which have different rheology, different flow characteristics? Spend all that money down on the farm, guys. This is where you should spend it. Spend it down on the farm so you don't need to worry about reformulation. Invest in farmers, right? So that you can get the product you want, the product you've always used, the product you've been relying on for decades, if not centuries, right? And do it right, right? So it's also interesting, coffee and cocoa without the A, so misspelling. All right, anyway, right. Our goal isn't to replace specialty coffee or craft cacao. It's to offer a sustainable, cost-effective alternative to the part of the industries that's most vulnerable. But you're not solving the problem of the farmers if what you're doing is you're giving these companies an off-ramp. So it's basically saying to the farmers, thank you for letting us exploit you for the last 50 years. Bye-bye, sayonara. This is the end of it. That is not sustainable, right? It may be a cost-effective alternative, but it's not a moral alternative, right? Which I think is the entire industry in this area is just doesn't understand. And as a matter of fact, they're not talking about. Right. So what I do want to do then is also talk about this. I spend more time than is probably good for me on Reddit. It's one of the few places where I actually really, really interact. This is the r/chocolate subreddit. There are 60,000 members, which makes it one of the largest communities in Reddit. Right. It's also quite active. I am a top 1% contributor and a repeat contributor in this group. Right. So I spend a lot of time. And I do want to give a quick shout out to Civil Turn. I have no idea who this person is, but the title here is "The Heavy Metal Scare in Chocolate is, without exaggeration, complete fear mongering that relies on people taking things at face value." Right. And there's a TLDR of 4 points. All of them are valid. Right. Now, if you've spent any time here on The Chocolate Life, if you go to TheChocolateLife.com, right, and you search on the word cadmium, what you'll do is cadmium and chocolate. You'll see that I've written extensively on cadmium and heavy metals, along with Chocolate Life contributor Keith Ayub. Right, and from the beginning, what I've said is that what Consumer Reports did was irresponsible journalism, right? And they created a feeding frenzy, and a lot of people have been unnecessarily and unwarrantedly, if that's a word, concerned about heavy metals, particularly cadmium and lead in their chocolate. But this post, which I say is, again, one of the best posts that I have read, and certainly wasn't expecting it to show up on Reddit, probably does the best job of debunking everything that's going on in the consumers' reports. If you are, in fact, concerned about heavy metal contamination in chocolate, you need to read this post and read it closely, and you will understand that um, that any concern about contamination, unless you have a dietary or genetic condition that predisposes you to issues related to uh, heavy metals contamination, which is possible. So there are some dietary conditions that make and genetic conditions that make you more susceptible to heavy metals contamination. But go take a look at it. Now, it turns out that Keith Ayub, who is a regular contributor to The Chocolate Life, who is a pediatric nutritionist who has I've been collaborating with on my posts, right, is in the process of taking a look at the underlying study for this. The research was done at Tulane University. So rather than just responding to the press release, right, which is all this is, we get from the Tulane University press office, Keith, because he is a oh, it is publicly available. If you want to go and read the actual study by Tulane University, here it is. You can go, um, you can go and download it. But Keith, because he has experience in reading these kinds of reports, and I are going to be collaborating on doing an update on this whole heavy metals issue based upon our understanding of the Tulane University study. So stay tuned for that. We hope to be able to put this to bed for just knock it down and say it's not a concern. So the final thing I want to talk about from a news perspective, really today, is that um, the FDA has gone and outlawed a number of food colorings which have been acceptable for the last couple of decades, and there are now 3 natural alternatives for blue and pea, and a couple, or for blue and green and a couple of other colors. So if you're interested in learning more, so the food colorants made from natural sources were approved less than 3 weeks after RFK Jr. Yay, not banned 9 artificial food dyes that were previously approved by the FDA, citing their association with a grim inventory, a variety of a grim inventory, which is bad English. Anyway, so if you want to go take a look at it, so we have a blue extract, a color changing colorant that is produced. It provides from bright purple to purple and green. A white colorant, um, I suppose, as a replacement for titanium dioxide, maybe, but we shall see. No apparent replacement for red dye number 3. But if you are interested in new colorings and flavoring, new colorings, here is a place to look at it. Also want to mention that there is an interesting retail opportunity in Harvard Square in Boston, or Cambridge, I should say, Cambridge, which is in Boston, which is to sublet a space. Here's where it's located. Here's Harvard Square. Here's the Harvard campus. It's about 200 square feet of move-in ready retail space. The owner is looking for a craft chocolate maker or a chocolatier or some distributor of chocolate who may be handling a bunch of different brands to take over that space. So if you're interested, the information to contact is on the post that's linked to here. I keep an update on events in chocolate and holidays and food events that are related to it. So it's been updated through May, and so I'm going to continue to update it. Actually, I would like to know if anybody went to Le Marché du Chocolat over Mother's Day weekend. They've scheduled a date for 2026. But if you were at the event over the last weekend, I'd be interested in know. Yeah, last weekend. To the 10th. The last week, Mother's Day weekend. I'd be interested to know what your thoughts were about the event. I know one person that has been able to help me, but I regularly update this, and so you can keep track of the chocolate holidays that go on. You'll see that there's a headline here that says AMA topic resource links. What I will do is I will add in the links that I showed over the course of the episode, but don't have in the post here. And then finally, one thing you may want to do, this is one of the things that I do, is I go and have a alert signed up for on cocoa or cacao, but not Canaveral, so Cocoa Beach, Florida, basically, because it's hard. So you've got much of this stuff. It changes on a daily basis, but if you are interested in just getting a really really quick overview of where things are going and a sensibility for where the market is going, at least taking a look at the headlines for this. So Nigeria eyes cocoa comeback as prices hit record highs. Again, East Sepik Province. I don't know what that is, but I need to go look at it. Um, Cocoa bod sounds the alarm. If cocoa collapses, Ghana economy collapses. Absolutely true, right? If so, just cocoa prices surge. Cocoa board will boost Nigeria's high standard production. Malaysia's first international cocoa fest in Sabah, which is in June, as I believe. Um, New York cocoa prices climb. Ivory Coast exports, right? So so this is about the Solomon Islands, I believe. Earning 76,000 from cocoa. So it's just, sometimes I will go in and look at these and I will find topics to include in the news and AMA, but just a general review of what's going on here. I get an email every day with these headlines. And so I don't tend to do it on the website. I will do it from my email. But it's just gives you a really, really, really quick um, um, top level summary of just keeping on top of what are the topics that people are covering in the world of chocolate and cocoa journalism every day. And with that, that's it for this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. We've been talking about the price of cocoa, the price of cocoa as it relates to the living income reference price, what a connection is between the living income reference price and Tony's Chocolate Lonely, right? As well as news about heavy metals in cocoa and chocolate, how the kerfuffle that was created by Consumers Report in 2023 is like completely overblown. I've spent a lot of time over the last 18 months responding to it, right? As well as there are a lot more people who are looking at ways to use precision fermentation and cell culturing to replace a lot of the cocoa that goes into industrial commodity chocolate to create alternatives to those things, which I don't think are a good things. But let me know what you think, right? So if you are a member of the Chocolate Life, what you can do is you can go to this post on the Chocolate Life. You can go to this post on the Chocolate Life. You can scroll down to the bottom, right, past all of this stuff, and there is a member discussion. So if there's anything you'd like to say about this episode, just start a discussion and I'll respond to it. You think I'm right? You think I'm wrong? You got something else you'd like to talk about? You can put it in the comments. Members can post on every comment on the Chocolate Life. However, if you have something you'd like me to write about, something you'd like to cover, there's now a button in the top above the top navigation here that says "Have a suggestion for a topic to cover." Contact the editorial team. This is a mail to link. It'll open up your mail client, um, and you can just mail me and say, "Hey Clay, I would like you to talk about X and Y and Z," and I will go engage in a discussion with you, and we'll talk about how to cover it. And if I have questions about your question, we can go and do that and make sure that what I'm doing is responding to your needs. So even though this issue or this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate was a fairly serious one, and the news episodes have a tendency to be fairly serious, just because of the nature of the cocoa crisis um, and issues related to the ongoing cocoa crisis. I do want to remind you, listener, watcher, participant, reader, however you're consuming this, to be mindful of on a daily basis that if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao.